I never believed in ghosts or haunted houses. Hell, I never believed in anything supernatural. But what happened to me that night changed everything. It started on a chilly October evening. I was visiting my friend's old family cabin deep in the woods, a place said to have been abandoned for decades. The stories about the cabin were vague and whispered, mostly passed down from locals who preferred to stay away. Strange things happen there, they'd say, half joking, half serious. My friend laughed it off. So did I. We arrived just before sunset, the sky bleeding orange through the dense canopy. The cabin was worse than I expected, windows boarded up, the wood rotten in places, and an eerie silence that pressed against my skin. We joked around as we set up camp, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. That first night, strange noises kept waking me, the creak of floorboards, faint whispers riding the cold wind. My friend shrugged it off as the cabin settling. I wanted to believe that too, but then the shadows began to move. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Flickers in the corner of my eye, shifting forms that vanished when I turned to look. But by the second night, it was undeniable. Shapes without bodies, dark and cold, slipping along walls and creeping through the trees outside. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or my mind playing tricks. But the shadows didn't obey natural rules. They stayed longer, lurking just beyond reach, growing bolder. One moment stands out, the moment I realized this wasn't a story or a dream. I was alone, walking back from the outhouse. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the forest was alive with sounds. Suddenly, the path ahead went black, not from the lack of light, but because the shadows had swallowed the clearing. I froze. The air turned ice cold. Then, out of that darkness, I heard a voice. Not a whisper, but a voice, low, guttural, calling my name. I can still hear it now. That was the night everything changed. The night I learned some shadows aren't cast by the sun. They're born from something far darker. The voice echoed through the trees, carrying a weight that felt both ancient and deeply personal. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins as I spun around, desperate to see where it had come from. But the darkness held its secrets tight, no shape, no face, just an oppressive blackness that seemed to pulse with malevolence. I wanted to run back to the cabin, to the safety of the flickering fire and the comforting presence of my friend. But my legs betrayed me, rooted to the spot by a terror I couldn't explain. The shadows weren't just around me, they were inside me, twisting and clawing at my very soul. Slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Not quite human, but not entirely something else. Its form was a grotesque distortion, shifting and flickering as if made of smoke and nightmares. Its eyes, if you could call them that, glowed with a cold, unnatural light, piercing through the blackness like knives. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The thing tilted its head, a soundless laugh vibrating through the trees. Then it spoke not with words, but with a chilling sensation that crawled under my skin. It wasn't telling me who it was was telling me I was next. I stumbled backward, breaking free from my paralysis, and tore through the forest toward the cabin. Behind me, the darkness seemed to follow, stretching its tendrils to snatch me back. I burst into the cabin, slamming the door behind me, breath ragged and heart pounding like a drum. My friend looked up, concern etched on his face as I tried to explain the impossible. But the fear in my eyes was unmistakable. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat in silence, the fire barely holding back the encroaching shadows. Every creak, every whisper, felt like a reminder that we were not alone. And then the scratching started, soft at first, like fingernails tracing the walls. But it grew louder, frantic, desperate. It came from the attic, the one place we hadn't dared to explore. With a mixture of dread and resolve, we climbed the narrow stairs, flashlights trembling in our hands. The attic was suffocating, thick with dust and the scent of decay. Shadows pooled in the corners, dancing just beyond the beam of light. Then, in the far corner, we saw it, a tattered journal, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. I reached for it, hands shaking, and as I opened it, the room seemed to close in. The journal was filled with stories of the cabin's past, of disappearances, rituals, and a darkness that had been awakened long ago. It spoke of a curse, a shadow that fed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each soul it claimed. Reading those words, I realized that what we were facing was not just a haunting. It was an ancient evil, a presence that thrived on our terror. We tried to leave that night, to escape the cabin and the forest, but the shadows had other plans. The path back was twisted, unfamiliar, as if the woods themselves were alive and trying to trap us. One by one, the shadows crept closer, their whispers filling our minds with doubt and despair. I felt them reach for me, cold fingers brushing against my skin, threatening to pull me into their eternal darkness. But I fought with every ounce of strength I had, holding onto the memory of sunlight, of laughter, of life beyond the forest. And now, I'm telling you this not because I want to scare you, but because some truths need to be shared. Because the shadows are real. Because sometimes the darkness reaches out and the only way to survive is to face it head-on. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every desperate step we took. The path, once familiar, had twisted into a labyrinth of gnarled roots and tangled branches. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy overhead, and the shadows clung to us like living things watching, waiting, hungry. My friend's breathing grew ragged beside me, his flashlight flickering as if it too was fighting the darkness. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from every direction, a suffocating presence that whispered promises of oblivion. Then came the first scream. It shattered the night like a sudden storm. We froze, hearts pounding, as the sound echoed through the trees, raw, desperate, filled with pain. My friend looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it a chorus of voices, whispers layered one upon another, speaking in tongues older than time. They filled my mind with images, twisted faces, endless darkness, and a hunger that could never be sated. We stumbled forward, every nerve screaming to run, but the forest had other plans. Roots rose from the earth like serpents, tripping us, pulling us back. Branches clawed at our skin, drawing blood. I felt something brush past me, a shadow, darker than the night itself, cold enough to freeze the marrow in my bones. I screamed, but no sound came out. The darkness was swallowing me whole. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the nightmare ended. We found ourselves at the edge of the forest, dawn breaking in soft hues of pink and gold. The shadows retreated and the oppressive weight lifted. But the terror lingered in my veins, a poison that wouldn't let go. Back in the safety of the cabin, we searched the journal for answers. The more we read, the clearer it became. The shadows were the curse of the land, a darkness born from betrayal and violence centuries ago. The only way to survive was to confront the source, to break the cycle of fear. That meant returning to the heart of the forest, to the place where the shadows were strongest. It was a choice between facing death or surrendering to eternal darkness. We prepared ourselves, gathering talismans, sage, and words of protection passed down through generations. The night we returned, the air was thick with anticipation and dread. As we stepped into the darkness once more, I felt the shadows recoil, sensing our resolve. the battle was no longer just for survival, it was for our very souls. What happened next is something I can barely put into words, a blur of fear, pain, and determination. But through it all, one truth held fast. Sometimes, the only way to defeat the darkness is to face it head-on, with every ounce of courage you possess. The deeper we ventured into the heart of the forest, the heavier the air grew, thick with a presence that seemed to seep into our bones. The shadows no longer merely lurked, they twisted, reached, and hissed with a malevolence that was almost tangible. Every step felt like wading through a nightmare, the weight of centuries pressing down on us. We reached the old clearing, a place where the moonlight struggled to touch the earth. The ground was scarred, cracked as if the land itself had been torn apart by something ancient and vengeful. At the center lay a stone altar, worn and stained, whispering of rituals long forgotten, but still alive in the dark. Our breaths came in ragged gasps as we circled the altar, the journal's instructions guiding our actions. We lit the sage, the smoke swirling like a protective shield, and began the incantations, words that felt foreign yet powerful on our tongues. The shadows roared in fury, a sound that shook the very trees and rattled the bones beneath the earth. They surged toward us, a tidal wave of darkness intent on swallowing the last flicker of light. But we stood firm, holding hands, our voices rising in unison against the chaos. In that moment, I felt a warmth spread through me, a fierce, burning light that pushed back the night. The shadows screamed, their forms unraveling, dissolving into nothingness as the dawn's first light broke through the canopy. Exhausted and trembling, we watched as the forest seemed to breathe again, the weight lifting from the land and from our souls. The curse had been broken, but the scars remained both on the earth and within us. We had stared into the abyss and survived, but the memory of that darkness would never fully fade. Now, I share this confession not just as a warning, but as a testament to the power of courage in the face of fear, the strength found in unity, and the truth that some shadows can be banished by the light we carry inside. So, if you ever find yourself at the edge of darkness, remember, it is not the absence of light that defines us, but the choice to stand against the shadows, no matter how deep they reach.